What's the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walton, joined by Sergeant Walton. Clint, how are you?
I'm excellent.
You sent me a cute cowboy picture of you yesterday.
Yeah.
I zoomed in and I'm looking at you. I'm seeing the reflection of the other horses and your sunglasses. How beautiful I love that hat.
Oh, yeah. It's a really cool hat because we got our hat badges. Although I need to get a new hat badge because my hat badge still says detective, but most people don't recognize that. And that's why I haven't really cared too much.
It's because you're sitting so tall on top of buttercups, they can't even see it.
I know, especially with the other horses. They're so small in comparison to her.
I wanted to talk about generational shifts in policing, but this isn't just for policing. This is actually something that I think we can strategize in order to be able to kind of autocorrect when it comes to generational differences in any type of workplace. I'm thinking about this, though, because I know that a lot of the conflicts that I see that exist in a lot of agencies where people will reach out to me and they'll be struggling with certain things. A lot of it comes down to some things that I've put on here in terms of challenges that we can actually overcome if we just identify them and we understand that that's actually what the problem is. Because a lot of the times there's an external element to an issue, but we blame it on the person instead, right? Like she's such a nut job or like whatever the thing is. But it's not necessarily the person. It could be a conflict that we're not identifying and then people don't tackle it.
Yeah, and I see this on a regular basis. Like I really sit down and think about, okay, when I was first a cop, when I had a year on, how are my supervisors towards me compared to how we have to be now and how it's shifted substantially over the years, just given the environment of policing that we're working in.
Yeah, and the first thing that I put on here is that there is such a big difference in approaches to communication when it comes to somebody who is newer to the job versus an OG like you, Clint. And I know that this is actually something that you've trained some people on when it comes to you supervising them and identifying that this is an issue, because a lot of younger officers in particular, they prefer things like text messages and emails, and they were conditioned and groomed to use that as their primary form of communication. Whereas a seasoned officer like you rely on face-to-face discussions or phone calls. And when it comes to your intelligence of your social intelligence of being able to actually have a face-to-face conversation, I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing in the younger generation is that that's non-existent for them. Yeah,
and that's a bridge that I'm trying to actually cross right now and dealing with my guys and you know, communicating through text, through email and all that stuff is good. But at the same time, I'm trying to groom them to where they're used to me showing up and talking with them in person compared to just being reliant on the technology aspect of things.
So this next one I put here is basically a tale old as time, because when it comes to different views on training and tactics, if you have any kind of new employee or new recruit, regardless of what profession, I think that a lot of the times those new people are going to be trained in these more modern tactics, whether it's something like de-escalation or certain levels of technology. And so because you have someone who's coming in who's new, they're being trained on this more modern way of doing things. And then you have somebody who's seasoned and they haven't been updated on what these new techniques are. That's such a big issue that I see, regardless of what profession. Then the two there's no bridge that exists between them. And so that is a super big challenge because it creates tension between that person and that person when things don't align.
Yeah, having conversations. I think this is the most important thing, is having conversations with those people to learn and always being open to different aspects of how a job may get done as long as you're achieving the same goal.
If you have somebody who is younger within your department, their emotional intelligence is going to be quite different than somebody who is seasoned. And I personally look at this as a downfall. I don't like the way that we have brought up our younger generation to be so soft and sensitive. However, they are going to be able to tell you like, hey, I'm feeling this way, or I don't like this. And, regardless of how somebody like us might feel about that, I 100% don't agree with being so soft and sensitive all of the time. And I think that had we not made it okay for people to be so sensitive, then we wouldn't have people using that as a crutch for something like mental health, when somebody like us, like you could go through the same exact thing and then not feel that way. So that, in my opinion, is creating more cause for more mental health damage by allowing people who are very young to be as sensitive as they are. And, some people might hate that I just said that. However, I grew up in a family with 5 brothers, being the only girl, having to go outside and like shovel rocks and shit, so stacking wood and like doing rough things, getting splinters on my hands and calluses by the time that I was 10. Like, I lived in a very different way. Whereas I see people, Clinton, you have a family member who's probably approaching 30 now, I would guess. And he couldn't now do what I was able to do when I was 10 years old because of how gentle and nurtured and protected said individual still is and then was. So I think that it's very important for us to realize that this is something that, while it's true that they will be able to say maybe certain things that they don't like, veteran officers, on the other hand, they're going to have been conditioned to embrace those long hours, that overtime, the really difficult tasks, and that in and of itself creates a major challenge.
One of the biggest things I've seen is, oh, well, that's not fair. How come they don't have to do that? And I look at them like, because I didn't ask them to. And it's trying to get them out of that mindset of, well, I don't know why I have to compared to why not everyone has to. And it's trying to change that dynamic and teach them, because later on, after they do whatever task I gave them or whatever it was, they're like, now I understand. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I explained to you in the onset. It's the fear of change, that fear of new coming into it is, they're just like, well, it's not a group effort. It's a one person individual type task.
That's another aspect of that variance in the emotional intelligence, because back in the day, like, you would have never questioned authority in that way.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's where I think we have to really implement that chain of command, that instill that leadership. And that's where, and I'm not saying like I'm some expert leader or anything like that, but it's something you have to earn. You have to earn your followers. You can't just expect them to follow.
There's also such a big difference when it comes to views on technology. So somebody who's younger, they might not have any kind of issue with adapting to things like new software, in your profession, Clint, things like body-worn cameras, any kind of digital case management. Whereas someone who's seasoned, they're more prone to wanting to sit there with a pen in their hand and have this sort of hands-on investigative work. I'm thinking about when I managed a pediatric practice, the whole reason I came in there in the first place was to be able to help them to implement their new electronic medical record system. And it was a challenge because the provider never wanted to, let's say, bring a laptop or a tablet into the patient exam room, mostly because she didn't want to showcase how faulty her behavior was when it came to her lack of education with technology, despite me like trying to push the education on her. And so she even still like continued to just write shit and then create more work for herself by taking that piece of paper and then later on getting like weeks behind on her notes because she had to eventually put it into the computer because the law required it.
In having those issues with technologies is kind of one of those, I'm mixed on it. Like, I love technology. I love what our capabilities are and utilize any and all technological resources that we possibly can, but also educate yourself on what if technology goes away. And that's where I've seen on a regular basis where our systems will crash. My guys don't know how to get anywhere in the city without having a map. And that's where I think we lean too much on technology when it comes to it. But it's such a great tool. Like, it makes our lives so much easier.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because you're weaning out like the survival of the fittest. You're literally you're setting them up to fall behind by not allowing them, not forcing them, not educating them. Is it required during the academy even nowadays to be able to learn something more than GPS when it comes to navigation?
Not really. No, I mean, they are FTOs when they're going through training, like they teach them that stuff, but these guys just don't retain it because they're like, well, I'm just going to use a GPS when I'm off of training.
It's interesting, right? Like somebody who probably can't even read a map.
Yeah, they have no clue. I remember when I got off of FTO, I had a GPS and I used it for a couple of months. I said, I'm not using this anymore because I'm forgetting all the stuff that I learned geographically for our city. You can give me an address anywhere in the city and I can get there.
It's interesting. It reminds me of any time that my dad interviews somebody to work in his construction business. The first thing that he does is he pulls out his measuring tape and a 2x4 and asks them to measure it for him. So yeah, there's definitely pros and cons on both sides. I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below. And as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.